Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team to reduce the potential for fraud, compliance fines, and just overall bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Phase 2 of the Nacha Fraud Monitoring Rule for ACH initiators is here, and now everyone has to comply. What are the requirements, and are you ready? Keep listening. Welcome to episode 391, Nacha Fraud Monitoring Rule Compliance for Non-Consumer Originators. Now everyone has to comply. Now, let me just say, when I say now, if you are listening to this podcast the exact day that it is being published, which is Thursday, June 18th, technically you have one business day, 2 business days. I don't know if you want to include Thursday, but Monday, June 22nd is the day that everyone that did not have to comply by phase 1's due date, which was March 20th, 2026. But that's the date that everyone has to comply. Now, the date was originally, or in some places probably still is reported as June 19th. However, that is a federal holiday, Juneteenth. And so Monday, June 22nd is when the rest of the folks that did not have to comply during phase 1 now have to comply. So let's start with first, who is Nacha? And then we'll talk about who are non-consumer originators. And then I will talk about what is required under that fraud monitoring rule. And then lastly, I'll give you some options for additional resources where you can go and get more information in order to comply. All right, so first off, who is Nacha? So if you haven't heard of them before, they are the governing authority over the ACH network. So if you have vendors that are paid ACHs, even payroll, right, that it's paid through ACHs, and I'm talking US, and so all of that goes through the ACH network. And so they set rules, and this rule has been set up in an attempt to reduce the increasing fraud when sending ACHs. In other words, we all have seen it. We talked about it. You probably maybe have had a few, thwarted a few. Maybe you've had a successful fraudulent payment. But what they're trying to stop really is all those business email compromise scams where you're now sending legitimate vendor payments to fraudulent accounts where those scams have been successful. And so in this fraud monitoring rule, there are requirements for your bank, requirements for your vendor's bank, and requirements for any organization that originates ACHs. Now, for those of you that are new to my podcast, new to me, maybe haven't been on any of my trainings, webinars, or anywhere else that that you would hear about my background, I used to be an AP senior manager over global vendor setup and maintenance, but I was also over payments as well. And we had over 125 pay cycles per week. So it was a fairly large company that I was with. And so what initiated a lot of pay files. And what happens is, just in case you're not familiar with the process, is when an ACH pay file is generated, it will pull in the vendor banking details from the uh, vendor's record in the vendor master file. And that bank file or that pay file will then go to your bank, be sent from your company to your bank. And then your bank will send it to the vendor's bank. And so the fraud monitoring rule has requirements for each of those steps. Now, is your organization required to comply with this rule? Well, you are, or organizations are included in the definition of the term non-consumer originators. And so if your organization generates ACH pay files in the process that I just talked about, or if you generate a vendor list of, all invoices that are due, and then you send that over to let's say a third party that makes your payments for you. I do believe you still have to make sure that they comply, but they would be included in there as well, because the Nacha Fraud Monitoring Rule also includes third party originators as well. But the onus may be on you to make sure that they are complying with this rule. So, in any event, you are a non consumer originator, or your organization is. And if you generate ACH pay files or generate a file to send to a third party, you do have to make sure that you comply. And as a reminder, because I think I said it earlier, phase one requirements or organizations were required to comply by March 20th. And how do you know if you were in phase one? Well, that was for any organization that had a 2023 ACH volume of 6 million ACHs or greater. And keep in mind, that is all ACHs, not just vendor payments. So I talked before about payroll is included in that. If you have other types of ACH payments, maybe like customer refunds, all of those are included. And so if you had, right, that 6 million, a volume of 6 million ACHs or greater in 2023, you're actually late, but you know what? Is better late than never. And if you had less than that in 2023, then June 22nd, Monday, is when the rest of the folks have to comply. So is probably you. So if you didn't have to comply in March, then you have to comply in June. Again, if you initiate ACH payments to go to the bank, or if you initiate a file to your third party originator, you need to make sure that they are complying as well. All right. So now that we've talked about who is NACHA, when you have to comply, let's talk about what the requirements are. Now, I am going to put a link to the NACHA Fraud Monitoring Rule. It says phase one, but it's the only page that they have for this fraud monitoring rule, and so you can use it for both phases. And so what they really require is, and I'll read based on what's on the page, it's that all ODFI, which is the originating depositor financial institution, which is your bank, and each non-consumer originator, that's you or your organization, third-party service provider and third-party sender to establish and implement risk-based processes and procedures reasonably intended to identify ACH initiated due to fraud. So they want to make sure that if you are sending bank details over, that those bank details are not fraudulent. Now, again, the amendment or this rule is intended to reduce the incidence of successful fraud attempts. Validations are required to be stronger, verifiable, exceptions need to be explainable, controls must be repeatable, and documentation is definitely critical. And then the other thing is that you have to review it at least annually, but in one of the webinars that Nacha did, they said that you have to have a really low volume and to do it annually. Expectation is that you do it more often. So those are the requirements. And no, NACHA does not tell you what those risk-based processes and procedures need to be. And they also don't tell you how to really define like the risk-based. And so I had a podcast number 379, that really talked about determining risk-based vendors, because you don't actually have to do all of your vendors. You can determine which vendors are the riskiest. And so that podcast episode goes into more depth about how to do that. But in that episode, and I'm going to say it here too, and you probably already know this if you've listened to any of my other podcasts or, attended any of my trainings or webinars, is that I think you need to do all of them. It's just one additional, right, control that you can put into place to help to avoid fraud. And when I say all of them, I mean, don't just apply, right, risk-based processes and procedures to high-risk vendors. I think you need to do them to all vendors, because some fraudsters will test you, and they may test you with a low volume vendor, right? That $20 vendor, just to see what your processes are. And then they come back again, because a lot of fraudsters, right, once they identify you as a victim where they can move through your gaps, and that results in a successful fraudulent payment, they'll come back to you again and again. It's not just with ACHs, by the way, it's with check fraud too. And I had a new scam alert about a check fraud where fraudsters submitted counterfeit checks. They stole the check, got the banking information from the check, created counterfeit checks, and not only did they alter the stolen check and then submit that for 10 grand, but they also counterfeited some checks, all at I think 10 grand a piece, because there were 10 checks, and the total loss, I think, was $100,000. And it was a small business too. So, that is very significant for a small business. But that's with checks. But they do the same thing with ACHs as well. And so I think you need to apply whatever those risk-based processes and procedures are to all vendors. Now, the last part is where to go to get more information. So I already talked about, I will include a link to the Nacha Fraud Monitoring Rule, and that's in the show notes. And then I also have a free NACHA compliance webinar, and this is on the day that the rule goes into effect, Monday, June 22nd. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern time. It's 60 minutes, and I will put a link to it. And it's called 3 Ways to Meet NACHA's ACH Fraud Monitoring Rule, Same Day Compliance. So make sure you check the link and sign up for, register for it. And if you are listening to this after June 22nd, 1 p.m. Eastern, no problem. Click on it anyway, and you'll be able to register to watch the recording and also get the handouts. So that's more information on how to comply, and it's free, as well as looking up the risk management topic on the NACHA website. But again, they don't really tell you how to comply. They just tell you what's required, which you may need anyway, because you might need to make sure that leadership understands what is required. So when you have that change in process, or want to add that to your ROI so that you can get approval for some software that might help you, or a platform that might help you, you will have your support that you get from that Nacha page. All right, so that is all I have for you today. I hope that gave you some guidance on the Nacha Fraud Monitoring Rule, awareness maybe for those of you that weren't aware that it was required, and also some resources for you as well. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 392nd episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.